So this is the last of the textual lessons. Patrick will do a couple of more thematic ones, and I'll do one tomorrow, and Patrick will do the sum up tomorrow as well. So this is final appearances. So this is into John chapter 21. Liked how Wiersbe opened up this chapter in his commentary. He said, the average reader would conclude that John completed his book with a dramatic testimony of Thomas, John 20:28-31. And the reader would wonder why John added another chapter. The main reason is the Apostle Peter, John's close associate in ministry. John did not want to end his gospel without telling his readers that Peter was restored to his apostleship. Apart from the information in this chapter, we would wonder why Peter was so prominent in the first 12 chapters of Acts. And I thought that makes good sense, because in the synoptics, you have him denying Jesus 3 times, and that's it. But John lets us know what else has happened, although Luke does tell us that Jesus had appeared to Peter. And so, this incident here in John 21 is not their first meeting after this. They met the day of resurrection. So that's already happened, because Luke records that. And it's also mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. But anyway, after Jesus appeared to the apostles the second time, the 11 did leave Jerusalem and go back to Galilee. They were at the Sea of Tiberias, more commonly known as the Sea of Galilee. Yeah, we don't have a precise time when this incident takes place. It is after this, after what happened in chapter 20, and knowing that where we are in Jerusalem, getting back to Galilee, we're talking, it's about a week's travel anyway, the way they normally did it. So yeah, it is a week or so later, if not slightly more. So that's when it takes place. This is, of course, the Sea of Galilee. This is where they say this took place. And I'll show you some pictures later on. I've been there 3 times, and the water level's different every time. It's getting closer back to what it was in the first century. So it was more full this time, this last trip we had. Anyway, while they're waiting for Jesus, some of them, seems to be led by Peter, decide to go fishing. To me, that makes some sense. You've got 4 fishermen there. So what are you going to do to kill time? Let's go fishing. That's what they knew. So Peter and Thomas, or the ones that were there, we've got Peter, Thomas, Nathaniel, James, and John, referred to as the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others. And this is where, as was pointed out later, or earlier by Billy, Thomas has Didymus added to his name. So that's a Greek word which means twin, as we mentioned earlier. So apparently he was a twin. We've got a chap named Nathaniel, and many believe, I do as well, that this is actually Bartholomew, because Bartholomew is not a proper name. Bar is son of, and son of Ptolemy or something like that. And he's listed here as one of the disciples, so it tend to lend credence to the view that they are the same. We also learn that he's from Cana. So we know that now. We've got the sons of Zebedee, James and John. So the question is, again, I like the speculation a bit. So we've got 2 unnamed ones. Who might they be? I would suggest Andrew and Philip. Why? Because Andrew is Peter's brother, and he's a fisherman. And Philip, because he is in close contact with Nathaniel. We know that from earlier. And that's my guesses on those. One of these, by the way, is the disciple whom Jesus loved, because we're going to see that later on in the chapter. That limits who this disciple was to these 7. We can eliminate, by the way, Peter and Thomas and Nathaniel, because they're mentioned by name elsewhere in this book. I think we eliminate James because the statement in verses 22 and 23 in this chapter would not apply to him. He's the first apostle to die, so he's definitely not going to live to old age. So if we're correct about the two unnamed one, the only one left is the Apostle John. So that's my conclusion as to who the disciple whom Jesus loved is. 95%, maybe, but it's close enough. Not that it really matters, to be honest. We've got 7 gone fishing. So they go fishing at night, instigated by Peter. By the way, that's not that unusual to go fishing at night. Sometimes you get better fishing at night. I know my grandfather, who reel fished, and he would often go in the early morning. He said the fish were biting better. I've gone with him when I was a child. He had a rowboat, and we'd go out on a lake. I have no idea what lake we went out on, but someplace there in that end of West Virginia. But some see in this that Peter was tired of waiting in Jesus and was forsaking him to return to his former life. I don't see that. I'm not sure that can be deduced from that statement. It seems to me Peter, being the man of action, may be getting bored waiting, and as there's a lake full of fish, make good sense to use your free time, something profitable. So let's go catch some fish. And most likely they needed either food, because you'd eat fish, or funds, because they sold them, that was their business, or maybe a bit of both. So anyway, they're going to go fishing. Tom Wright wrote, why have they gone fishing? It's a puzzle. I suspect it was a puzzle for them too. Like half the things Peter proposed in the gospel, it was probably a case of the right motivation and the wrong judgment. He wanted to get on with life, to do the next thing. This is the world they knew. It would feel strange going back to it, but they had families who needed looking after, who must have been bemused to have them back again after all their adventures, and might well have been suggesting they should settle down and do something sensible for a change, like earning some money. Now, I could hear people saying that, and I thought, well, that does ring true, at least in our context. So I like that. But they are still awaiting further instructions from Jesus. And they do need a way to pass the time. So they fished all night. Apparently a common practice. And by the way, keeping in mind, they wouldn't have had electric lights on the boat. No battery-operated lights. Those things don't exist, okay? So if they had any light, it would have been very much candles or something burning. It wouldn't be candles, it would be oil lamps. Chances are they don't have any lights whatsoever. They're fishing. And they would have most likely been net fishing. Now, those of us who've been on the Sea of Galilee have seen demonstrations of net fishing, but using modern nets, not necessarily because our modern nets are made of plastic, sort of thing. But here's a demonstration of how this was sort of done. This is a small net as opposed to a big one. So there's the guy, he's got his net, and so you'll notice it's got weights on the bottom, okay? So he's going to get it so that when it hits the water, it's in a whole circle, so it's going to sink down and catch anything that's in there. So that's Tiberias, by the way, in the background you can see there, the little settlement there. So here he goes, and see how his cast is? Not bad, it's in the water. So he got his net in the water. That's roughly how it was done. And then, after leaving it in whatever time you do, this is our first trip, by the way, hence it's dark, because we had a late sailing on that trip. So it's time now to pull it back in. So he reels it back in. Let's see if he got any fish. And it's down a ways. So here it comes, and then it is totally empty. So no fish. Yes. Yeah. So he should have gone to the other side and tried it. Yeah. Interestingly, the next two trips we're on, they fished from the other side. Still didn't get anything. But anyway, But nevertheless, I thought it was useful at least seeing, the casting and all that. It may have been a bigger net or something as well. So, but that's roughly how it was done. When I think of fishing, I always think of, but that's not the way they did it. They used nets. So there you go. That's how it was not done. Well, that's how they were doing it initially. So there you go.
He had a big pole there on the boat, which prevented him from really throwing it out.
Yeah, getting a good throw. That's right. He did. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, dawn arrives, and Jesus appears on the beach. The disciples don't recognize him. Okay, possibly he was too far from land. About 300 feet, they were too far from land. 300 feet's not far, but it would be difficult to recognize someone if they weren't expecting them at that point in time. The Greek is that he was 200, they were out 200 cubits. That's about 300 feet, which in American terms is an American football field. And that is quite a distance when you think about it. I guess a soccer pitch isn't far off that. So if you're standing at one end, and keeping in mind that one's not above the other, they're basically on the same level. So they don't recognize them. And it's possible as well, since it's just dawn, there's not light enough to see clearly. And possibly some have suggested he was disguised in some way, and that's possible. I tend to go for the more natural explanations, though. Jesus called out, "Children, you don't have any fish, do you?" I like it. And he speaks to them as a stranger would, children, which is a common address of the day. The Greek word used here is not really the word for children. It might be better translated boys, and such as an older man might use in referring to a group of younger men, or George Hill. I don't know how many times George calls me a boy, and, which is fine. I don't take an offense to that at all. But of course, George is a bit older, so there you go. But his question was like that of a person possibly wanting to purchase some fish, because apparently that was, if you saw somebody out fishing, you might say, "Hey, you got any fish? Would you like to have some to take home?" So, and that seems to be the way the disciples have regarded this. And they yell back, "No, no fish." Jesus then told them, "Cast the net on the other side of the boat, and they'll find some." And apparently they weren't surprised at that request. McGarvey wrote, "The movements of large bodies of fish in the waters of Galilee are frequently visible to one standing on the shore. Supposing that the stranger thus saw fish upon the right side of the boat, the disciples readily obeyed his command without suspecting who it was that gave it, although it does give it away in just a minute. But yeah, so they immediately do it. And since they fished all night and failed, they really had nothing to lose to make another cast out. So they did, and they did. They caught fish. In fact, they cast it down the other side and caught a vast amount of fish. Such a large haul that they couldn't pull it into the boat, which, by the way, tells me they had a pretty big net, a lot bigger than our guy had, a good-sized net. I always think of the fishing they did more of maybe the North Sea, where you maybe not, well, it wouldn't be that long, but still a lot bigger than just a small net. But it's at this point that John figures out that the stranger is Jesus. He tells Peter, "It's the Lord." Undoubtedly, the similarity to a previous fishing expedition had come to his mind, again, one teeming with fish. Merrill Tenney said, "Just as he had once before given them a large catch of fish when he summoned them to become his disciples, so he repeated the miracle under similar circumstances." So there is a lot of them. So Peter immediately tucked in his outer garment, jumped into the sea, and swam for the shore to see Jesus. By the way, that doesn't sound very much like somebody who's avoiding him or somebody who's forsaken him. That's why I don't think that the forsaking him is what's going on here. He did deny him, but I don't think he's trying to get away at this stage at all. Now, the Greek literally has that he was naked. Okay? Peter's behavior here has been puzzling to many interpreters. It's usually understood that the Greek word gumnos, usually translated naked, does not refer to complete nudity as it could, since this would have been offensive to Jewish sensibilities in this historical context. It is thus commonly understood to mean stripped for work here. That's what New American Standard translates it, and the New Living does. That is, with one's outer clothing removed. And Peter was wearing either a loincloth or a loose-fitting tunic, a long shirt-like garment worn under a cloak. The New American Bible has, for he was lightly clad. So yeah, basically, he can move, he can work, he can throw that thing without being encumbered. Believing himself inadequately dressed to greet the Lord, Peter threw his outer garment around himself and dived into the sea. Which makes... Can you imagine getting dressed and going swimming? Yes, usually the other way around, but this is what he does. So, which indicates he is in some way stripped for work and wants to clothe himself a bit. Yeah, here you go. Yes, I've not seen that one for a while. That'd be good to watch soon. It goes on to say, R.E. Brown's suggestion seems much more probable here. The Greek verb used, and there it is, does not necessarily mean putting clothing on, but rather tying the clothing around oneself. The same verb is used in 13:4-5 of Jesus tying the towel around himself. The statement that Peter was naked could just as well mean that he was naked underneath the outer garment and thus could not take it off before jumping into the water. But he did pause to tuck it up and tie it with the belt before jumping in to allow himself more freedom of movement. For the clause that states Peter was naked is explanatory. Note the use of for, explaining why Peter girded up his outer garment rather than taking it off. He had nothing on underneath it, so could not remove it. I thought that was a pretty good explanation, that that's all he's wearing, so he's not going to remove it. He's lightly clad. He's not going to remove it. He's going to make it so that he could swim. You wouldn't want to impede your legs if you're swimming, or your arms for that matter. So anyway, he jumps in. The other disciples sailed to the shore in their small boat, dragging their catch of fish behind them. By the way, it would have been a very valuable catch of fish, so you're not going to leave it behind. You're going to bring it in. When they got out of the boats, and there seemed to be boats there, a plural of boats, they saw a charcoal fire going with fish cooking on it. Charcoal, there you go. I love things cooked over charcoal. And some bread. Notice Jesus doesn't need their fish to cook. Where'd he get his fish? He could have just gone up to water and, yeah, there you go, Scott. Come on. Same place he got his clothes. Excellent. I like that. So, yeah. So he provided fish twice for them that morning. In the net and on the fire. Jesus told them to bring some of their catch, apparently, to add that to the breakfast that he had prepared. Peter helped to haul the net to the shore, and inside were 153 large fish. And John seems to record this as amazing that such a large catch did not tear the net. Keeping in mind they didn't have the nylon or whatever we use, which won't break. They would have had to deal with that. So he mentioning this may indicate that he regarded this as miraculous as well as pointing out that he's an eyewitness to this, what happened here. 153 indicates they counted them, by the way. They knew how many were there, without a doubt. And then Jesus invited them to break their fast. It's breakfast, basically, a light meal eaten before noon. And Jesus or it was pointed out, the text points out that no one had to ask who he was. They all had figured that out by themselves. They recognized him. They knew it was indeed Jesus. Although the fact that none asked may indicate that there is something different about his appearance. But they don't have to ask, they realize who it is. So it seems to be maybe something different there. Tom Wright says, they knew it was him, yet they wanted to ask and were afraid to. Why did they want to ask? They'd been with him night and day for 2 or 3 years. They wanted to ask who he was. I might as well wake up my own wife one morning and ask her who she is. If they didn't know him by now, they never would. And yet, the sentence only makes sense if Jesus is, as well as the same, somehow different. No source mentions what he was wearing. No source describes his face. Somehow he had passed through death and into a strange new world where nobody had ever been before, and nobody has yet been since, though we are firmly and securely promised that we shall join him there eventually. His body was no longer subject to decay or death. What might that have been like? We have no means of knowing. I like it when Tom says things like that, because I think, for me, it makes it real. That's what it was like. So there they are. He's got fish cooking. The bread's, I guess, already made. By the way, I think we should think flatbread and not a loaf of bread. I mean, that's what they were eating. So he took bread, he gave it to them as well as fish. And John records that this was the third appearance to his disciples as a group after his resurrection. It's possible that the other 4 apostles were in the area and joined the rest for breakfast, but it's a third appearance that John recorded, and possibly the third appearance to the group of them together. Some of them, there's already been appearances to some individuals, and we know that. That's recorded elsewhere. Notice he doesn't say it's the third appearance of Jesus, but it's the third appearance there. So it seems to be to that group. By the way, there are 10 recorded appearances of Jesus to various disciples, including the women, after his resurrection. But he didn't appear to those who were not his followers. And that's what had been said. In fact, Peter makes that emphasis throughout the book of Acts. But this is the 7th of the recorded appearances, soon after the last appearance recorded in chapter 20. The others are, by the way, and they may be, as much as I can get them in some sort of chronological order. There was, of course, Mary Magdalene being the first in John chapter 20. There is the women, and that's been mentioned in Matthew chapter 28. There is Peter. Luke mentions that in chapter 24. There are the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. That's in Luke 24. There's the apostles without Thomas. That's in John 20. The 11 in John 20. And I think Luke records one of those, if not both of those as well. There is the fishing scene here in John 21. Paul mentions 500 disciples at one time. Seems to be up here in Galilee. 1 Corinthians 15. He appeared to James at some point, his brother. First, he mentions that 1 Corinthians 15. And of course, the appearance when he ascended back to the Father. So this may have been the last time that they actually returned to Galilee. You know, they go up here, he'd send them up here, he's there, and then they end up back for the ascension back down in Jerusalem, keeping in mind that Pentecost is on the way, so that was another festival. Boy, they did a lot of traveling as Jews, didn't they? The 3 required festivals, plus there were 2 or 3 others that they traveled down for. Feast of Dedication is mentioned in John's Gospel, so they did a lot of traveling backwards and forwards. But from now on, we read of them in Jerusalem and then traveling throughout the world. So this may be their last time up here. Andrew Patterson writes, as they faced up to the challenge of the future as well as closure with the past, they knew they needed a strength and help beyond their own if they were to succeed. No doubt there was some anxiety and trepidation. So what did Jesus do? He fed them. He looked after them. The message was clear. Jesus was telling them, I will care for you, I will look after you, I will abundantly supply all your needs. No need to worry. I'll be there. No record, by the way, of any conversation during that meal as they ate together. It's just they were eating. And they wanted to ask questions, but weren't going to. And Jesus then speaks to Peter. To me, it seems to be a private conversation, not in front of everyone. Maybe the others have gone to deal with the fish, because they would have to be dealt with. So that may be what's going on there. Merrill Tenney points out that although Jesus had already appeared to Peter privately, on which occasion he may well have restored Peter to his fellowship, Jesus, dealing with him at this time, reinstated him publicly before the other disciples. It also conveyed Jesus' desire for a new motive in service. So even though this conversation may not involve all of them, it seems to me it's just involving the two, with John tagging along behind, that they are watching what's going on. They're aware of this conversation that's happening. And he asks Simon, and then we're familiar with this section, do you love me more than these? Notice a couple of things here. Doesn't call him Peter, which is the name he gave him, small stone. He calls him Simon, his given name. And there's been also a lot of speculation of, he doesn't specify what the these are. Do you love me more than these? Is he referring to the other disciples? And remember that in the upper room, he professed a greater love than any of them. I'll go with you and die if that's what it takes. Although he didn't. But anyway, that's why he's professing. Some have suggested, does he love them more than the fish? In particular, the fishing business. Yeah, I don't really go that direction on that one. Net Bible Study Notes said, as Brown has observed, by Johannine standards, the choice being offered to Peter between material things there is in Jesus would seem rather ridiculous, especially after the disciples had realized whom it was they were dealing with, the Lord. And I would tend to go with that. But the point seems to be, does he love Jesus as the most important thing in his life? I think that's the point. No matter what we want to make the these, more than anything. And that may be why he expressed it in such vague terms. Do you love me more than these? And I think it's the other disciples reflecting what Peter said back in chapter 13, and I think it's the other disciples, that even if others forsook Jesus, he never would. That makes sense to me. But is Jesus first in his life? Net Bible Study Notes writes, it seems likely there's some irony here. Peter had boasted in 13:37, I'll lay down my life for you. The synoptics present Peter as boasting even more explicitly of his loyalty to Jesus. Even if they all fall away, I will not. Thus, the semantic force of what Jesus asks Peter here amounts to something like, now, after you've denied me 3 times, as I told you you would, can you still affirm that you love me more than these other disciples do? That would make sense to me. So that very well could be what's going on. But I think this probing that he's doing is designed to impress on Peter the need for maybe a bit more caution and less boasting about how strong he is in the future.
I was going to say, we look at this in a kind of static form.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas here's 2 men engaged walking along the road, somebody's falling to the back. So it could have been an ad gesture, so I'll be more than these, pointing to what's in front of him.
We can't see that.
You can't see that, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it could just be as simple as that gesture. Do you love me more than... And he points
Maybe all this.
Aye.
Yeah, with the disciples doing their work as well. So, yeah, very well could be. The problem is, when you're reading it, you're not seeing it. And I always try to see it, but the problem is our seeing is sometimes imperfect, simply because we aren't there. We aren't there. That's why, to me, just going to Israel was useful, because we can at least see something of what it was like. So that helps bring it a bit more to life. But still, we're not in that situation. So, yeah, we can't see what's going on. Wouldn't you like to have heard tone of voice as well? Yeah, I mean, that would have been nice, at least as we use tones of voice. I'm assuming they did something like that. Not that we could understand a single word they said, but because I don't speak English. But, yeah, it's all that's going on there. So, Peter's response, yes, Lord, you know, I'm going to use, you know that I like you. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Peter's answer omitted the reference to more than these. It doesn't mention that. In Greek, of course, there's a lot more going on than meets the eye in most English translations, which some commentators have pointed out. What Jesus is saying in Greek, in English, is, do you agape me? Do you love me with the greatest of loves? And Peter replied, yes, Lord, you know that I phileo you. I love you as someone close to me. And McCord translates it, I like you. I think that sort of works there. Is there anything in that? Any significance at all in that? Most of the Greek fathers saw nothing in the difference in words at all. That's the early Christian writers. Most of them didn't see anything in it at all. Most Reformation scholars saw no difference in what's going on there at all. Yeah. It didn't. This didn't get pointed out until the 19th century scholars. This is a very late sort of view on this. And it's sort of gone around that most modern scholars don't see anything in it either. So there could be, there may be, there may not be. The reasons for seeing no difference in what's going on there, I think there's some reasoning for that. John often uses slight stylistic variations in words as synonyms. He's done that before. He's interchanged phileo and agape before in this book. So it's hard to be definitive that here it's radically different. The original conversation most likely was in Aramaic and not in Greek. And Aramaic and Hebrew have one basic word for love, same as we do in English. Although he uses a different word for love, his real answer to the question is yes. Yes, I love you. Yes, it's a different type of love. Edgar Patterson says the difficulty is, of course, that the interplay is so noted and obvious, that Peter himself reacts to Jesus changing from agapeo, to phileo in his questions in verse 17. So it would seem that John intends something here. When John uses the word agapeo, it usually conveys the sense of a strong love that originates from God. However, when John uses the word phileo, it usually conveys a love that is of more human origin and nature than divine. But keep in mind as well, even though they're speaking most likely in Aramaic, the Holy Spirit had John record two different words in Greek. There's a reason. I mean, the Holy Spirit doesn't just do that. There's a reason. This is Holy Spirit backed. So I think there's an emphasis going on here, even though it may not have been as apparent initially.
Is this just the first question, or is this throughout all of them?
The first two, Jesus uses agape.
Yeah.
This third one, he reduces it to phileo.
And all times Peter's saying phileo.
Yeah, he phileos every time.
I was thinking if it was just the first one,
Yeah.
Jesus does make it conditional. It's, do you love me, in reference to this stuff. So that could be why he responds differently there, but no, it's throughout them all.
Yeah. It just seems to be maybe something, because that's why the Holy Spirit wanted it recorded in Greek. And of course, English always lets us down. So go. Billy.
I was just saying there as well, you mentioned the Holy Spirit accurately recording what we need to hear. In the previous we discussed about more than these, more than everything, more than this. Why would that not be made clear in that passage of Scripture?
Maybe it doesn't need to be made clear.
Why discuss it?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's more applicable to everyone if it's big. Because if it's if he had said, do you love him more than fish? Then someone's like, well, I love Jesus more than fish, I just don't love him more than my car, or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas, because it's big, everyone can just
It's easier to apply it. Yeah.
Can I at this point
Could be
as well
something
just
that's-
say, always be very careful what you mark in your Bible if you're handwriting. Because I've got a wee note there saying first and second, but not third Peter. And I'm thinking, I thought it was only first and second Peter.
I know what you meant. I know what you meant. Yeah, so there you go. There you go. Again, this is Warren Wiersbe. He says, however, it's doubtful that we should make too much of an issue over this because the two words are often used interchangeably in the Gospel of John. In John 3:16, God's love for man is agape love. But in John 16:27, it's phileo love. The Father's love for his Son is agape love in John 3:35, but phileo love in John 5:20. Christians are supposed to love one another. In John 13:34, this love is agape. But in John 15:19, it's phileo. It would appear that John used these two words as synonyms, whatever fine distinctions there might have been between them. So I think he's got a good warning there. Let's not camp out on a big difference here, but at the same time, there's got to be a reason that the Holy Spirit's wanted it that way. So, but he does use them somewhat interchangeably, or does he use them interchangeably to show it's not only agape, it's phileo. It's both that we've got to have. And I think that may be that too.
Well, the brotherly love's important. I think that's why that was.
Yeah.
Because he's actually, well, the references back to you dying me 3 times, so here's the 3, I'm asking you the same sort of thing, the importance of what that's about.
If you think about what
Enforcing it.
Peter wrote, is it his second letter, that you have faith which produces all this, which produces phileo, which produces agape. So you got both of them involved in our relationship, and they're both important in our lives as well. What somebody wrote, I can't remember where I read it, but I liked it, that as Christians we should be a family of friends, and I like that idea. You've got we're God's family, but we're also friends. We care about each other. So we're not sort of vague ships that pass the night, but we are involved with each other. When you read the book of Acts, especially those first few chapters, they're so involved in each other's lives. And that sort of progresses all the way through. And that's the way I think we need to be as well. So
I love the passage that says, if they love peace, allow for all men, but especially those of the household.
yeah, no choice there. Yeah, we need to be at peace. And I always come back to Ephesians 5:2. That is, the way it's translated to American, is we need to put up with each other in love. Bearing with one another is the sort of received translation. And bearing doesn't mean anything to me, but putting up with each other, man, I can relate to that. So because of love, we put up with it. Yeah. What's that?
You said Ephesians 5:2.
Yeah, 4:2, isn't it? Ephesians 4:2. Ephesians 4:2. Yeah, it just popped in mind. He's got the wrong verse. So anyway, after Jesus saying, do you agape me? And he says, yes, Lord, I phileo you. Jesus replies, feed my lambs. And that seems to be indicating, recognizing an obligation as a teacher and a shepherd to take care of those who belong to Jesus. And by the way, bringing in the prophets of old, and the leaders weren't being the shepherds they should. He's saying to Peter, be a good shepherd. By the way, that comes out in some of Peter's writings as well. Interesting that as well that we mentioned that he addressed as an assignment. So Jesus then asked again, do you love me? Again, he uses agape. Peter replies again, yes, Lord, you know I phileo you. He's still making no superior claim to any great commitment that's greater than any of the other disciples. This time, Jesus responds, shepherd my sheep. And to an extent, that's maybe another way of saying feed my lambs. Some people will make a distinction in that. But again, the idea seems to be that, or maybe it's indicating lambs being young Christians, sheep being older Christians. You need to take care of them too. Maybe something in that. Third time, Jesus asks, do you love me? But this time he used the word phileo. Peter was a bit perturbed that Jesus was still questioning him. He replies, Lord, you know all things. You know I like you. You know I phileo you. And this time it's feed my sheep. So we got feed my lambs, shepherd my sheep, feed my sheep.
Yeah, the shepherd I've always thought about is that watch over the flock.
Watch over the flock, yeah. And by the way, he is going to become, in the biblical sense, a shepherd. So yeah, so that may be something going on there too. Perhaps Peter was getting upset about the number of times that Jesus questioned him. I mean, we get upset when somebody asks us the same question over and over again, but then to do it 3 times, and he denied Jesus 3 times, I don't think that's coincidental. Tom Wright says the 3 questions correspond to Peter's 3 denials. 3 for completeness, yes, because 3 is a complete number, but 3 also for reminder. The smell of the charcoal fire lingers. There's a charcoal fire when he denied him, charcoal fire now. So Peter's night of agony and Jesus' own night of agony returns. But because of the latter, the former can be dealt with. Jesus is the Passover lamb who takes away the sin of the world. Peter's sin included. Your sin, my sin. He died for the sin of the world. And because he had 3 times denied Jesus, Jesus asks him 3 times to affirm his love. And by doing this, he helped bring Peter back to his original commitment to Jesus. Jesus had shown that Peter couldn't rely on his own strength because he tried that and it just did not work. His motivation had to come from Jesus. I think Jesus' confidence in Peter is seen in that he restored his privilege of feeding Jesus' sheep. So Jesus has confidence in him. And I think we can see some maturity in Peter from just a few weeks earlier when he denied him. He's grown a bit because of that incident. He's not so impetuous now as to claim that he loves Jesus more than anyone or anything else. In fact, he will not go as far as to say that he agapes Jesus, apparently for fear that he'd be proven wrong yet again. He's willing to affirm that he is Jesus' friend. And we can see also in all this that Jesus has a task in mind for Peter, taking care of and feeding his sheep. As an apostle and later on as an elder, Peter would have had many opportunities to do that. He's going to get an opportunity in just a few weeks, is he not, to start this off. Wiersbe says Peter and his Lord had already met privately and no doubt taken care of Peter's sins. But since Peter had denied the Lord publicly, it was important that there be a public restoration. Sin should be dealt with only to the extent that it is known. Private sins should be confessed in private, public sins in public. That's a good point that he makes there. I like that very much. Jesus then goes on to talk about Peter's later life. I tell you the solemn truth. When you were young, basically you did what you wanted to do. But when you would get older, he says, you will stretch out your hands and others will tie you up and bring you where you do not want to go. Now, no matter how you take that, how detailed you want to make it, is telling him that he's not going to be free to do what he wants to do, that he's going to be bound in some way. And John adds that Jesus said this to indicate clearly by what kind of death Peter was going to glorify God. Did you notice that? When Jesus dies, it's glorifying God. If Peter's going to die, it's going to glorify God. the death of a Christian glorifies God. Interesting. We ought to include that in our weddings, our funeral ceremonies. Sorry, I have the same problem my dad had. Well, weddings and funerals sort of mesh together. But in our funerals, we should say that. This is a glorification of God because this person is now with him. He's evidence that following God matters. But it seems to be telling us that Peter was going to suffer martyrdom. And by the way, it tells us that Peter's type of death was probably known at the time this was published. So Peter probably died sort of mid-60s, so this is probably someplace around that time period. By the way, if tradition is correct, and some of it doesn't make any sense to me, but if tradition's correct, as an older man, Peter was in prison. I believe that did happen. But then they say he was crucified upside down, which would fit into the imagery of Jesus' prediction being crucified. But to me, I don't understand how an upside-down crucifixion would even work. What's that?
Gravity is what you need for the
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But the tradition, the Catholic tradition, is that he felt that he could be crucified the way Jesus was. I'm not sure that would go through his mind. I'm not sure the Romans would even listen to him because they don't seem to do that. And how many thousands upon thousands have been crucified? Jesus wasn't the only one. So I don't know if there's anything to that. But it does gives some imagery as to what's going to happen. But, so all that's going on there. So that Bible study note says this is a parenthetical note by the author. The phrase by what kind of death Peter was going to glorify God almost certainly indicates martyrdom, and it may not predict anything more than that. And that may be all it's saying is that he will be killed for following Jesus. By the way, that means he's going to be faithful. He's not going to fall away again. He's going to be faithful. Patterson says, if you wanted to recruit someone to your cause, do you think you would have gone about it in the way that Jesus did? Surely you would emphasize all the positive benefits. Instead, Jesus tells Peter he will grow old, helpless, and weak, and that his life will end with him being executed. Yeah, not the signpost you'd want to put on the advertisement to be an apostle of Jesus, but that's what he can expect. By the way, Jesus doesn't mince words, does he? And again, he's always, didn't he teach count the cost? This is what, you need to look at the cost because there's a cost involved in following Jesus. And Jesus ended this interview by telling Peter, follow me. That's what's important. Possibly a double meaning in that, by the way. Follow me now, don't forsake him. Follow me to a violent death as well. Follow me. I'm your example. Follow me. So Jesus ends the service to say, follow me. Okay, there's where I was going. So why did Jesus take this approach? Because he wanted Peter to follow him whatever the cost, whatever the future might hold. Jesus was indicating that being a genuine disciple costs you everything. It would seem that the purpose of that exchange was not only to let Peter know he was forgiven and accepted back, which he'd probably already told Peter in that earlier interview, but also I think to let the apostle, the others know that Jesus had accepted Peter back despite his denials. This is the type of beach. This is the location where they say this took place. We've got a bit more light in here today, don't we? This was from my first visit in January of 2018. Sea of Galilee was very low that year. What we're seeing here are the rocks that are usually covered with water. So it would have been up this way just a bit. This is the same scene. Notice that little spit of land that juts out there. And that's the same scene. See, there's that spit of land where it was in November 2019. So that's when we all were there. And there was quite a bit of water in it. And this is the water level in September 2022. very little beach left. I mean, it was really full. They do regulate the depth of the Sea of Galilee now because they use so much of the water for irrigation, but they're trying to get it filled back up. It's dammed at the end now, so it doesn't flow naturally out into the Jordan anymore. Jordan's very low as a whole, so they're able to do a lot more regulation there. So, and here's another shot from September 2022, and everything's standing in water. It was really deep that particular year. So, and this is a church building they've built over where they say all this stuff happened, of course. But it's interesting, there is a first century dock that they've built this church building on the rock there. So this was a place where they docked. So probably first century, the water is even up higher. It's probably up to here. So, because that's where they would dock their boats.
This is a holy place.
Oh, did you like that? Yes. Sorry. Yeah. In fact, you're going to see.
Almost came across on that.
Yes, it is indeed. But yeah, this is. Yeah, that's not, but that is. Yeah, the rock is, but the shore isn't. Yeah, really. I should have put the picture I took of
What are you
that.
not allowed to do?
What's that?
What are you not allowed to do?
Step one.
It's probably climbing or something.
Oh, there. You're not allowed to swim. I think you're not allowed to swim. Now, there is a sign, at least it was there our first trip in 2018, and it may be gone now, on the other side, no barbecues. Which I quite liked.
That was there 2000.
Was that there in the 2019 as well? Yeah. No barbecues.
A lot of Christians probably do that.
Poor Jesus. Yeah, you can't have a...
I said follow it.
Yeah. So... Yeah, no barbecues. You go inside this building. It's not a very big chapel, but you go inside it, and it's built over the stone, and they say that is where that interview took place. I think we can partake that one thing in our cellar of salt. They have to identify every single location, everything happened, and a lot of them are wrong. But the general vicinity is good, and so accept it for the vicinity. What does it say there? Menta Christi. Yeah, so anyway, for what that is. Anyway, so finish the interview with Peter. Peter's not done yet, though. So he turns around and sees his close friend, John, following them. It would appear that possibly Peter and Jesus have taken a little walk along the seashore, and they have a shadow behind them. So Peter asks Jesus, Lord, what about him? Isn't that a human thing to do? You've been told what's going to happen. Yeah, but what about him? So what about him? And then, if it's his John, I believe it is, they were good friends. He would be concerned about him. Jesus' reply basically is that it's none of his business. It's a mild and gentle rebuke. If I want him to live until I come back, what concern is that of yours? You continue to follow me. Someone's saying, don't worry about him, worry about yourself. That you're the one. You need to make sure that you are staying faithful. Peter seems to be getting sidetracked again, but Jesus pulls him back on track. His concern was not to be the future of the other apostles, even his close friends. His concern is to remain faithful himself. John, what this disciple was to do, didn't depend on Peter. And what Peter did didn't depend on him. They both need to stay faithful. Now, tradition tells us that John did live to be an old man. And he didn't have to face a lot that Peter had to face. I mean, although if tradition again is right, I think it's Josephus possibly, it may not be Josephus, but somebody's recorded that, Peter and Paul both executed. It said that John was doused in oil and set alight, only it would have burned. And so he didn't get burned alive. So if that's accurate, interesting.
That might have been before Revelation, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that would have been before any date you'll put in Revelation, because then he's banished. Yeah.
It's not complete for sure.
Yeah. So it's interesting stuff. So, but this interchange, the writer says, started a rumor that Jesus had said he wouldn't die. Of course, he didn't say that, but it's, you know how people can hear something and then it sort of grows arms and legs? Well, this one appears to have done the same thing. And so John points out that Jesus didn't say that. He wasn't indicating that he wouldn't die. He just told Peter if it was his will for John not to die, it wasn't Peter's concern. Don't you love it? By the way, these guys were humans, weren't they? I mean, everything. They react as we react. And I think it's good.
Good lesson for all of us.
Good lesson for all of us as well, yeah. Don't worry about what they're doing. And so often, even within a congregational setting, well, he's doing that, and I've been told this. He's doing that. Why aren't you doing it? Why am I not doing it? Because he is. I'm doing this, and he can't do this. Yeah, it's not that we're all to be clones of each other. And a number of us have been through enough of that. It's that we have the things that we can do, and we need to get on with it. Don't worry about them. Worry about ourselves. Do what we can do. So, Wiersbe writes, the book ends with Peter and John together following Jesus. I like that. And he led them right into the book of Acts. Well, it leads you into the book of Acts because that's the order we have it. I'm not sure necessarily it was initially designed that way, but it's the way we have it. But had they not trusted him, been transformed by him, and followed him, they'd have remained successful fishermen on the Sea of Galilee, and the world would never have heard of them. That's something to think about. Yeah, because of Jesus, they were changed. And he ends with, this is the disciple who testifies about these things, has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. There are many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written, which I quite like that sort of idea there. So he closes by pointing out that he's the disciple. And anyone could read this, who read this, could believe his testimony as one who is an eyewitness. He saw it. He's written it down for us. And his testimony was true. Although, he says, there's a whole lot more I could have written. I could have written about a lot of other things, but he's selected, and he says that end of chapter 20, he selected these things for a purpose, to bring about belief. But it goes on to say, if someone tried to write it all down, there'd be so many books that the world couldn't hold them all. He said there's a vast amount of material that could have been compiled about Jesus. But I think what he's saying is what we have is sufficient. This is what we need. You know, we have speculations about all sorts of things. To be honest, we have what we need. And that's the point. We don't have to know all the fine ins and outs of everything. Now, Bible Study Notes concludes this section by saying, the author concludes the gospel with a note concerning his selectivity of material. He makes it plain that he's not attempted to write an exhaustive account of the words and works of Jesus. For if one attempted to do so, the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. This is clearly hyperbole, and as such bears some similarity to the conclusion of the book of Ecclesiastes. As it turns out, the statement seems more true of the fourth gospel itself, which is the subject of an ever-lengthening bibliography. They're still writing books about John's gospel. It goes on to say, the statement in verse 25 serves as a final reminder that knowledge of Jesus, no matter how well attested it may be, is still partial. Everything that Jesus did during his 3.5 years of earthly ministry is not known. This supports the major theme of the fourth gospel. Jesus is repeatedly identified as God, and although he may be truly known on the basis of his self-disclosure, he could never be known exhaustively. There's far more to know about Jesus than could ever be written down or even known. On this appropriate note, the Gospel of John ends. And Tom Wright concludes his this way. Even if it might be technically true that every single deed Jesus ever did could be written down, and that the books, though numerous, would ultimately be finite in number, nevertheless the point remains. The world wouldn't be able to contain them. They would be too explosive. It'd be like trying to play a wonderful symphony on a broken piano. It'd be like trying to serve a gourmet meal in a snack bar. It would be like God's breath inside an ordinary human being. It'd be like light shining in darkness, and the darkness being unable to master it. The world couldn't take it. But the ultimate point is this: once the Word has become flesh, all the books in the world can't do justice to it. And I think that's his point there. There's no way we can do justice to what was written there. So to summarize this particular chapter, Jesus appeared to some of the apostles while they're fishing on Galilee. Another possible sign in the large catch of fish. Jesus restores Peter to his original place as an apostle, and he would die a violent death, whereas the other disciple would live to an old age. And there's much more that could have been written, but this is sufficient and true. This is what John intended to do. Tenney writes, thus the fourth gospel concludes with a note of active faith. Having brought its readers to the realization of what belief is and how it grows, it leaves him, like Peter, with a challenge to put that belief into action. In this way, the fulfillment of the purpose of John becomes the responsibility of the individual believer. It's up to us. What are we going to do with it? And I think that's the way John wanted it to be. Anyway, that is us through this particular section. Question, comments, observations?
I love the scene between Jesus and Peter, because the depth of it, it's like the best reconciliation scene ever.
Yeah.
The fact that Peter's grieved the third time indicates, because of the emotions there, that he was feeling still some sort of shame, some sort of guilt, and ultimately didn't know if Jesus actually loved him. And that would have been a complete barrier to what he needed to do. But Jesus brings that out of him and then covers it. And each time it's a statement of trust. I'm giving you something that I care about. Feed my lambs, tend my flock. Jesus was all about that. And I'm giving it to you. I trust you. I love you. I know you can do this. And then that, like you said, the promise of the execution, it's like, oh, it's not. It's very much like you scattered then. You won't then, when it actually counts, which is just amazing.
It's interesting that he had said, if all others forsake you, I'll die with you. Yeah. He's going to. He's going to. Yeah.
A couple more things. What was it? I think maybe just the one. This whole book is written from that disciple's perspective. He's the one bearing witness. But it's not until the last verse you get the word I.
Yes.
Never once to the whole thing, and then it's I suppose. And I have a feeling that that's intentional as well, because it's the idea of myself last.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is about Christ. And even then that I is with sort of Jesus. It's still talking about him.
Yeah.
It's just a neat little thing because it kind of hits you.
Yeah.
Who's I? Oh yeah. Because you can tell us the story.
Which is a bit different from Luke, especially when we get into the book of Acts, because we can always tell when he's there. We did this. But you're right, John doesn't, even though he'll give very chronological, the next day. We saw that in the earlier part. And he's relating things, and they're different, but things that he saw, and he had to be a witness to have known these things, basically. And then the end, it's me, by the way. It's I. Yeah, it's me. Yeah. So.
Just on the point that you were talking about the upside down crucifixion, asphyxiation still occurs upside down.
Okay, fine.
But what happens is it's the intestines, the gut, and the liver pressed in on the lungs and becomes really difficult to breathe to the point that it can be even
Okay.
agonising than being vertical.
Do you have experience with
No.
that?
No, but
Yeah.
the first thing it is blood rushing to the head. It's the weight changes, you know what I mean? And it can last 24 to 28 hours before you can die.
So you very well could have.
He could have been. I just can't see the Romans. Yeah, he doesn't want to be. Oh, we'll do it different for him. I just can't see that.
Michelle and I were watching the show the other night, and it's called Supernatural, and it's got like angels and demons and all sorts of stuff in it. The protagonists were walking past this hospital room, and at the start of an episode you're always like wondering, okay, which one's going to be the witch or whatever sort of thing, and they pass by this room and it's this old lady, grey hair, in this wheelchair, and on her wall is an upside down cross, and Rochelle was like, well, that could be the... And I said, no, she's a Catholic, it's the cross of St. Peter. And she was like, what? Because that's one of my things, like, people make a big deal about upside down cross or it's Antichrist, it's just like, that's actually a Christian symbol. They don't realise it. But it turns out she wasn't a witch.
Yeah. Very good.
Right.
Anything further?
I like the
Go.
point you made at the end that, you've got the same challenge.
Yes.
Let your belief come into action and really prove your love and show that you do love them.
As he writes in his first letter, it's all about obedience. Obedience, love, and love for God is seen in how we treat each other.
And that was the other thing I had to say. To do with what the hymn, it kind of echoes what Jesus said in John 15 about I am the vine, you are the branches, remain in me. Like, the branches aren't connected to each other except through the vine. It's just that utter reliance on Christ. Kind of what you were saying about the body, like, why do we do this? Like, it's kind of the same thing. We're given gifts and we're different parts of the body, but still the emphasis is that it's all about our relation to Christ is paramount.
Yeah.
And through that we can interact with each other.
Yeah.
You very well said it's all about him.
It is all about him, absolutely.
It's all about him.
As Alistair would say, without him we could do nothing.
If we could just learn it's not about me, we'd get a lot more done. Yeah.
It's funny, before you said it was without him, that's what went through my head, because I associate that song with Alistair, because I remember reading it a lot when I was a kid at Northside. So, I don't know if that was his favourite song, but I was a bit spooky when he said it. I was like, that's what was going through my head.
Yep. Anyway, we'll take about a 10-minute break or so, or less, and Patrick will pick up from here.
Yes.